Alright, hello everybody and welcome to the first video on the second channel. Thank you for joining me here. I know initially I had said I had planned to live stream these videos and then save the recordings here. My schedule's just a little bit busy and a little bit sporadic right now, so maybe one day in the future we can do live streams, and sorry if that's what you were hoping for, but I still think this will be worthwhile. So let's just get into it. I do want to say a couple things before we begin. I've got some notes here. So keep in mind the opinions expressed in this video are only opinions. My interpretation of or reaction to the work will not be the same as everyone else's, for better or for worse. I will look for the good and the bad, but no matter what I say, please don't be too hard on yourself if you submitted something, and just keep writing. For those of you in the comments, please be respectful. And just keep in mind, my opinion is not going to be everyone's opinion. If I like it, not everyone's going to like it, unfortunately. And if I don't like it, there will be people who do like it. And so please just keep those things in mind, right? Let's just jump into the first submission. So our first submission comes from Ewan. If you want to see more of Ewan's work, you can find him on Substack, Ewan Hardie 33. And Ewan has the quote-unquote honor, I guess, of being the first person reviewed here because he actually subscribed to my Patreon. If you join my Patreon, you can get a priority code if you submit your work to me. So since Ewan is essentially being paid to, is paying me to have his work reviewed, we're going to start with him. And so one last thing before I get into any of the works here. I apologize for mispronouncing any names or words within the poems. I'm actually not the best when it comes to reading out loud as much as I enjoy reading, so apologies in advance. And if I come across a word that I don't want to say for whatever reason, I will replace it with the word blank. You're going to note that there's some words in the poems and stories here that might be controversial, to put it that way, and so some of these words, even though they're not the words I wrote, right, I still just don't want to say them, just as a matter of personal comfort. So with that all in mind, let's go ahead and get into it. I'm going to try to zoom in on the poem here and adjust the focus. Okay, so hang on just a sec. Okay, that looks pretty good, right? I hope that's okay. So, Ewan, like I said, since he is paying essentially to have his work reviewed, he submitted 9 poems, and since he's paying, we are going to take a look at all of them. My analysis and review might not be that thorough, just because there are so many, and I do want to get to the other submitted works, but we're just going to do what we can. So this first poem is called 2024 Knocked on My Door. And you'll note Ewan here wrote these are 9 of his poems that he is relatively happy with. And one thing he wanted to note was that they are meant to be performed. So this is spoken word poetry before it's written poetry. And you might note that, like I said earlier, I'm not the best reader anyway when it comes to reading out loud. And Ewan would probably perform these poems a lot better than I'm about to. So just keep that in mind as we go on. So, poem number 1, 2024 Knocked on My Door. 2023 came and went, spent in Glasgow's deep lament. A boy in red, from Inverness, he said, beckoning again for another attempt at betterment. Following from my arms to my legs, and then back to my head, a roller coaster has been thread into my skeleton and cerebellum, coasting rigidly, overriding my reasoning, prancing down my spinal cord, eliciting sensory overload next to my tight, lonely soul. What is better? How can I be better? My structure's impoverished, a fast handiwork construction, running on a drip of digital detritus, fed through tubes and synapses. I'm a technicolor tent, a carnival of nootropic contempt, bustling and bristling, then smoldering pathetically, my chronology merely increasing. There's a clock ticking deep inside, withering eyes, muscles, mind, doors closing, avenues narrowing, crushing and smothering, brittle bones down a pinhead hole. I'm dying. It's fascinating, the ease of simply existing, the tightening noose of aging. It's the feeling which reminds me of just how fleeting this all is. So, we're just going to take it a little bit line by line, and when something jumps out, I will give my opinion. So, 2023 came and went, spent in Glasgow's deep lament. Pretty decent rhyme, and, this is supposed to be performed, and so Ewan's kind of playing loose with rhyme scheme, which I think is great. I will say came and went is sort of a cliched phrase. You might consider replacing the word came, and then you're doing a twist on the cliched phrase, right? From there, a boy in red from Inverness, he said, beckoning again for another attempt at betterment. And so we get this clue already as to what the poem is about, this idea of self-betterment, and I think that's poignant since the poem's about, the new year, and we're all focused on New Year's resolutions. A boy in red, to me, is reminiscent of Catcher in the Rye. The main character, Holden, he has a red hunting cap that is very sentimental to him. And, the whole project of that book is about retaining one's youth, which is part of this poem as we go on. I don't know if that was an intentional reference, but I like that I was able to make that connection at all. It allowed me to connect better with the poem. Flowing from my arms to my legs and then back to my head, a roller coaster has been thread into my skeleton and cerebellum. I do like that third line there in this stanza, a roller coaster has been thread. I think that's fun language there, the idea of threading a roller coaster. You can just visualize that, right? That's a fun little symbol right there. Moving on, coasting rigidly, overriding my reasoning, prancing down my spinal cord, eliciting sensory overload next to my tight, lonely soul. Good descriptors there, tight followed by lonely. I think that's pretty unique. Lonely maybe is a word we see often in poetry, but putting it next to the word tight, I think, makes it a little more interesting. Prancing down my spinal cord is also a nice visual that ties in well with the roller coaster that's been thread. Rhetorical questions. What is better? How can I be better? A little bit on the nose, if you ask me personally, but, it is the project of the poem, so fair enough. Moving on, my structure's impoverished, a fast handiwork construction, running on a drip of digital detritus, fed through tubes and synapses. I don't know if I have much to say about this stanza. Like I said, it probably sounds better when Ewan says it than when I say it, but I do like a drip of digital detritus. That's good alliteration right there. I think the visuals are on point with this idea of, fed through tubes and synapses. Moving on, I'm a technicolor tent, a carnival of nootropic contempt, bustling and bristling, then smoldering pathetically, my chronology merely increasing. So again, we get this idea of, time, the passage of time, aging. I like technicolor tent as a descriptor of a human being. For one thing, the alliteration is neat again, but also describing a human as a tent, I don't know, I think that's a loaded symbol. I like that a lot. There's a clock ticking, so the continuation of the last line, this idea of time passing. There's a clock ticking deep inside, withering eyes, muscles, mind, doors closing, avenues narrowing, crushing and smothering, brittle bones down a pinhead hole. So kind of sad visuals when you think about it, this idea of aging as doors closing, avenues narrowing. I think that's super relatable. Like, we all fear that we won't achieve as much as we could have when we were younger, right? The more that we age. And then moving on to the next page, I'm dying, it's fascinating, the ease of simply existing, the tightening noose of aging. It's the feeling which reminds me of just how fleeting this all is. The ending, I don't know, I'm having trouble articulating my thoughts here. I don't know if the ending really drives the whole poem home, if that makes any sense. But on the other hand, I actually kind of like that, because it's like, This poem has a melancholy feel to it about aging and about trying to become a better person, but then we're reminded at the end that this all is just kind of fleeting, and in a way the poem is kind of fleeting as well. So, interesting. This next poem is titled Ground, and I don't know if mature content warning is part of the title or if that was just the author saying, literally there is a mature content warning here. Either way, be advised, but I kind of like it if it's part of the title, to be honest. So we'll read through it again. I'll try to mark as I go. I kind of forgot to do that with the last poem. I just mark anything that catches my eye as we read through it. So, by God's design, my mind, a pickled, riddled, bygone fissure, a crater pictured on an app called Grindr. But the news is out, a blank about, intrepid explorer of what it means to be a horror. A lattice of face, waist, anus, cock further than the eye can see, scrolling through proximity, evaluating the composition of their bodies like some kind of fucked up Wall-E, whose programming aims for the destruction of IV me. Hundreds of messages sent and received, lies a little piece of me. Prep, mask for mask, trans only, all the backdrop of my tragedy, where something's amiss, a kiss, discourse, bliss at nearness, but I can't help it, my loins are a penance, a storm of such magnitude that I deride and decry the tenderness inside. It's teratogenic, wearing away my composite, an oxide on my hide, flaying my ability to provide a resolution to years and years of disillusion. But then again, why so sad? This is the destiny I chose. Your body's a temple, mine's a city, littered upon with canals and crevices, conductors, running trains on its orifices. Going global is always an option. You, I, they, them, all on the menu from Peru to China, a no-holds-barred bonanza, the Met Office up in arms, as at its newest evaluation. Globo homo is a greater threat than the heating of the Great Steppe, the brevity of potential buggery held within this one body makes Sodom and Gomorrah look like a little tea party. I'm talking planetary shit, the Gaia hypothesis, where equilibria is formed by interaction between earth and sea. It appeals to me, because no matter how grounded I could become, my lurid depths will always pull me back to zero sum. But I've began to rethink my edifice. Sorry, I just lost my place there. Just wanted to make sure the camera was right. Let me start that stanza once more. But I've began to rethink my edifice, enacting my own TED Talk about the ontological significance of being a fleshlight with arms and legs. Maybe going to a therapist would have been better than a supposed cunning linguist, pound for pound. The tongue may be the most powerful muscle in the body, but its currency is inflationary, illusory, when compared to the solidity of a body next to me. Okay, so really good stuff here. This might actually be my favorite poem of the 9 that were sent, but let's just take it one at a time. So I like the opening line right away, by God's design, and we kind of see more religious motifs at play as we go on. And sorry, I'm just going to try to adjust the focus here just to make sure the words are sharp as possible, readable as possible. Oh, geez. I'm sorry, everyone. Bear with me. Okay, so in terms of sonics, I really do like the way these lines sound all together. A pickled, riddled, bygone fissure, a crater pictured on an app called Grindr. I really like the R sounds in these 3 lines with fissure, pictured, and Grindr. Very good, very good. But the news is out, a blank about, and of course, that word, I just don't feel comfortable saying it. Intrepid explorer of what it means to be a horror. So really, I just like the concept a lot, if I'm being honest. I think this is a great concept for a 21st century poem. This idea of using a dating or a hookup app and what that means, right? And putting that into poetic language. So using Grindr, the author compares it to being an explorer, but also there's this idea that they're, either whoring themselves out or looking for others who are whores, and that's interesting. This whole idea is really interesting, and they go on to expand on why it's so interesting. A lattice of face, waist, anus, cock further than the eye can see, scrolling through proximity. This is where it becomes really, really more interesting to me. Evaluating the composition of their bodies like some kind of fucked up Wally whose programming aims for the destruction of IV me. So I love the comparison to Wall-E. I like the language here, evaluating the composition of their bodies. It makes the whole thing sound very mechanical, right? When the whole idea of the dating app or the hookup app is that it's, romantic or carnal, or there's some measure of passion to it, right? But here it sounds mechanical, which I think is interesting. I underlined IV me because I'm not entirely sure what that's referring to, but I would love some insight there. Hundreds of messages sent and received, lies a little piece of me, prep, mask for mask, trans only, all the backdrop of my tragedy, where something's amiss, a kiss, discourse, bliss at nearness. And so here we get this hint that as the author is using this hookup app, they're on the surface, they are looking to hook up, but something is amiss, as they say, right? There's tragedy at play. What they really want is a kiss. They want discussion. They want to be near somebody, and we're going to see that come up again later in the poem too. Speaking of religious imagery, it comes up again with the line, my loins are a penance. The word loins is one that's used a lot in scripture, in religious texts, and then penance as well kind of refers to this spiritual price that one pays. A storm of such magnitude that I deride and decry the tenderness inside. It's teratogenic, I'm going to be honest. I don't know what that word means, so I'm going to have to look that one up later. Wearing away my composite and oxide on my hide, flaying my ability to provide a resolution to years and years of disillusion. I like the word hide. It makes it sound animalistic, right? Moving on to the next portion of the poem. But then again, why so sad? This is the destiny I chose. So this is an interesting turn, an interesting shift in the poem, where the speaker has to question, why are they so sad if this is what they chose? Sorry, I don't mean to just paraphrase it, but they're grappling with this idea of, do I want to hook up with somebody, or do I actually want more connection than that? And that's an interesting wrestle, right? And is that even possible? Is it possible to find connection with people still in this day and age? I think that's a question that the poem is raising. I underlined the word bodies here because I think it's not the correct version of the word, the correct form that the author is looking for. I think you want BODY''S. Your body is a temple. Mine's a city. So again, more religious imagery here, littered upon with canals and crevices, conductors running trains on its orifices. That's good language, good descriptors. This idea of a city upon the body, trains on the orifices. I like the imagery. Going global is always an option. You, I, they, them, all on the menu, from Peru to China, a no-holds-barred bonanza. I like putting they, them here because that's, unfortunately, with the way, culture war issues are, they, them is kind of a buzzword now for radicals. And so, and this whole idea is it's an app, and so you list your pronouns in your app description. So I think that's maybe a subtle reference to that. I could be wrong there. And then this idea of menu, it again paints the people on the app as food or as something less than human, right? From Peru to China, a no-holds-barred bonanza, the Met Office up in arms. I underlined it's here because, again, I think it's the wrong form of the word than what the author is looking for at its newest evaluation. I think you want the possessive rather than the contraction. Global homo is a greater threat than the heating of the great steppe. The brevity of potential buggery held within this one body makes Sodom and Gomorrah look like a little tea party. Sodom and Gomorrah, another religious reference, biblical, Christian. It was a city destroyed for debauchery by God, and a lot of readings of the Bible, if I'm not incorrect, suggest that Sodom and Gomorrah was specifically destroyed for homosexual relations, which, of course, Christians deem sinful. And so we're talking about Grindr here. We're talking about homosexual relationships, and I think it's a funny line. It makes Sodom and Gomorrah look like a little tea party, right? This city that God destroyed for its quote or I'm treading carefully here because I don't want this to sound like my opinion, right? This is the opinion of some Christian denominations that Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed for quote unquote evil, when really it was just, people loving each other sexually. So it's a funny line. That's all I'm trying to say. I like the illusion. I like the line. I like the word equilibria. That's nice. I like the metaphor of interaction between earth and sea as a metaphor for, human connection. And my lurid depths will always pull me back to zero sum. I think that's interesting in the sense that, they just can't win. The speaker, the author of this poem can't win, no matter what they do. I underlined began because, again, I think it's the wrong form of the word. When you use I have, you want to use begun after it, but I've begun to rethink my edifice. The visuals here of being a fleshlight with arms and legs, that's visceral imagery, right? That really makes the reader kind of perk up. The word fleshlight in particular is like, whoa. And so to call oneself a fleshlight with arms and legs, it's again taking a human being and making them less than a human being, making them an object, right? As for the words cunning linguist, that's obviously a play on cunnilingus. It's one that I've heard before, which isn't to say you can't use it, but it might be a little bit used up, if you want to put it that way. There might be something more unique you could perhaps put in its place. As for the last two lines of the poem, again, this is sort of the project of the poem, and we'll use the last three lines really. Illusory when compared to the solidity of a body next to me. And so there's kind of a double meaning there. Body next to me, that could be sexually, but more likely I think it's referring to, with the word solidity, this idea of having someone constantly next to you rather than just in bed next to you, which is illusory. So really interesting stuff going on in this poem, absolutely. And this next one is called I'm a Big Meanie. Bitch, peasant, desperate vagrant, piecemeal representation of a know-nothing defunct generation. Is that me? A know-me, a whacked-out rat-mouth predictability, a spindly specter of half-assed gay lexical derivation, enacting a hatchet job on the very people that keep me socially sated. Actually, you're right. Rice, gerbil on ice, perfunctory dictator of socially appropriate communication, straight-edged language modification. You call me back on that when you can provide a testimony to your whimsical self-flattery and clumsy-handed slanted view on your own misogyny. I, on the other hand, will continue to store spores of malfeasance, striding out and battering with ignorance, because that's me. My rebuttal to thee is that it's all right being mean, if the alternative is dreary. So, taking the first lines of the poem, someone is being quoted here when they say, bitch, peasant, desperate vagrant, piecemeal representation of a know-nothing defunct generation. So that's someone speaking to the author of the poem or to the speaker of the poem. Is that me, a know-me, a whacked-out? I'll say the rhythm on these lines. It does sound nice, and it probably sounds better when someone besides me is reading it. But at the same time, I don't know if I'm going to put this the right way, but it's, I don't know. No, I just can't find the words for it. A spindly specter of half-assed gay lexical derivation. It's a lot all at once. I think that's how I want to put it. But like I said, it probably sounds better when read by somebody who's not me. I'm going to say I don't understand rice or gerbil on ice exactly. I don't really know what that's referring to here. But these two lines kind of help us understand that, the person who was initially speaking in this poem, the one being quoted, is trying to be socially appropriate. They're trying to be a dictator of socially appropriate communication when really they don't have the right to be. Um, and so when they call the speaker these things in the first few lines of the poem, what they're doing is they're being a dictator, right? They're holding it unto themselves to decide what is and what isn't right to say. And so that helps us kind of understand the last lines of the poem when it says, being mean is better than being dreary, right? And they put mean in quotes to further emphasize this idea. They're not truly mean. It's just, when looked at from the lens of somebody who doesn't realize they're a misogynist or someone who's trying to control what is socially appropriate, anybody's going to sound mean in that sense. When you narrow the parameters of what is socially acceptable like that. I did underline the word "the" here because I think it was used more for a rhyme than actually fitting with the tone and the voice of the poem up to this point. It felt a little bit awkward is all. Moving on to the next poem. This is one of the shorter ones. It's called Chemistry. My chemistry teacher told me love of petroleum is the best litmus test for capacity, fractional distillation, a creamy emulsion for pedagogy, evacuating the neuronal branching antipathy be a tachycardic hypertensive anomaly, a smell here or there, boundless productivity, the lust has real set in me for the discovery of chemistry. So there's a lot of jargon here, jargon meaning, words given to a specialized field. And so a lot of chemistry terms, of course. And there's this sense that, chemistry actually means more than literal chemistry within this poem. The word pedagogy calls to me just as somebody who studied education. And the word creamy is also calling to me just as an interesting descriptor amid the rest, where there's a lot of jargon here. The word creamy, it doesn't really sound like a word a chemist would use, right? And that makes it jump out. And that's a good thing, in my reading anyway. I will say there is so much jargon here that it makes it hard for an outsider to understand, to follow, right? Which I think is the point. I think that's part of the poem. So in that sense, good job. This line reads a little clunkily. The lust has real set in me. I'm not sure if real is like the word that's actually intended there, but that could just be me. I can't say much more about this because, it's a little bit lost on me, and that's a me problem more than anybody else's problem. So if anyone watching this wants to opine on what this all means, be my guest. I would love that. Next poem is titled When Anna Came Over. Gumdrop button, tainted with spite, a chalice of water on this frightful night. You open lips, tears cresting mix with blood. I love you. God knows I hate you, we know. Nuance lacking in the grandstanding divide. Utilize both your heart and your mind. Width given like hip. Reconcile the tiny fragment of glass lodged in your windpipe. I don't know how to act around you. You flow through me as I you. But our channel is blocked, fraught, taken out back and shot. Pierced from behind, development is an effort. Puberty, a red line mast, fueling the vector that transported us to this future. An angel to a man, your land was shook, memories desecrated, trodden upon by this big oaf and his crook. I tried to be gentle, but the sunbathing was always my greatest love. Burnt after all, soldering my identity into sun-weary mum. The mask had dropped. Occipital access, frank, despicable, tragic, vibrating in face of bohemia, tangtastic. Tonguing my empty glass with apprehension, what was the purpose? A defeatist objection, Jenga built and flung, decomposed, to reform the conception of parental historical affection. The spoils of this war were tenuous, delirious, rabies-ridden, and contagious. Maybe now you'll take my opinions serious. Anyway, When the red wedding was over, Anna starkly made an exit maneuver, Mum's head in a stupor. While I'll contemplated the essence of my nature, it hurts a lot sometimes, always playing the villain in our own theater, parents unified in calling their emotional serial killer. All in all, though, Mum, when dawn comes, will return to ground level love. So, there's a lot going on in this poem, at least in my preliminary reading. It sounds like there's a reflection here on the relationship between a son and a mother, as well as a boy and a girl, if I'm reading this correctly. There is some sexually charged language here, like here, you open lips, and then tears cresting mix with blood, I love you. And so you open lips, open lips on their own as a visual, that just sounds a little suggestive, right? And there was another word later on, let's see. Yeah, the word tonguing down here. Tonguing my empty glass with apprehension. I think, again, similarly with open lips, that phrase, it's just going to have a suggestive nature to it. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, I do want to say with this phrase, you flow through me as I you, I think that's a little overused personally. I think there is a more creative way to write that. But I will say these lines down here, these help us sort of understand the meaning of the poem, where the speaker is using this metaphor of this foreign land that was trodden upon by this big oaf and his crook. I tried to be gentle, but sunbathing was always my greatest love. I like the symbolism at play here. It sounds like a man who has neglected his relationship, right? Who has trodden on this land that he was not supposed to. And I like sunbathing as a metaphor, as a symbol, because sunbathing is kind of a selfish activity, right? It's something you do simply for yourself, and normally it is sort of a vanity project. You want to make yourself look better. You want to make yourself look tan, right? And then it moves on. It evolves. Burnt after all, soldering my identity into sun-weary mum. The sunbathing ultimately leaves them burnt, which is interesting. I like the visual of Jenga. I like that as a symbol. That's modern. Yeah, that's about all I have to say there. With these lines, I underlined over and maneuver because I just really love the way that sounds. I think that's a great rhyme. When the red wedding was over, Anna starkly made an exit maneuver. I don't know, that just sounds great. That's really good. I think this is the wrong word here. While I'll contemplated the essence of my nature. Or maybe there's just not supposed to be a D here, right? While I'll contemplate the essence of my nature. So yeah, to me, this poem again just reads as a sort of an autopsy of a man's relationship with women and how that stems from the relationship with a mother. And maybe I'm misreading, but it almost sounds like there's hope in the ending, which I kind of appreciate. All in all, though, Mum, when dawn comes, we'll return to ground level love. I think that's sweet. Yeah. I don't know if I have much more to say there other than it's a very relatable poem, kind of just about patriarchy in general. Me as a man reading it, I see a lot of moving parts in there that relate to me. Next up, School Trauma of the Ginger-Haired Kind. I think that's a great title. Love that. 100 centimeters is the meter by which I judge your failure. Diagnosis, gingivitis, avoidant brushing, for fear of bleeding, bespoke feeling, rendered fat, aftermath to the fad, crushing, disposable nothing, aided by anxiolytic running, with a dose of isotretinoic peeling for the sake of feeling stationary in awe of your masonry. Oh, shoot. Sorry, guys. I forgot to plug in my computer before I started here. Give me just a second, and we'll get right back into it. Sorry. right. Okay. So back to the poem. 100 centimeters is the meter by which I judge your failure. I don't think this was what was intended, but what it reminds me of is in school how we had to run the mile or run a certain distance, and we were basically tested on how fast we could run. And there was like a hierarchy based on that. And, we've learned a lot about health and fitness standards since then. I wonder what that looks like now. Anyway. I'm not sure if I have too much more to say about this piece. I will say that idea of running, having to run a certain distance as a student is further supported when the speaker says anxiolytic running with a dose of isotetranoic peeling for the sake of feeling stationary in awe of your masonry. I like the word masonry too, I will say that. It conjures ideas of authority and also like immoral authority, right? So, moving on, this next poem is called Trapper. The trapdoor spider's stares, hydrostatic, aware, predatory propensity, searching for an insect for tea. It waits patiently, kinetics balanced perfectly, lunging sporadically at the briefest of touch. A ravishing's a coming. She's hungry, oh so very hungry for a bit of lunch. A cricket, mouse, beetle, all mulch, when injected by caustic spittle, liquefied, fertilized for a Darwinian game where she will never be the loser. So, the speaker is using this symbol of a spider as somebody who's predatory, right? I think that's the most obvious reading of the poem. To me, as a straight man, it almost reads as a femme fatale, a woman who lures men into her grasp, a man-eater, as Hall & Oates would say. But I think that's not the correct reading of the poem. I think it's more specific than that, right? And less sexist than that, obviously. I think it's simply about somebody who is predatory, right? Somebody who lures other people into their web and devours them, just like a spider, right? The concept on its face seems a little bit cliche almost, but I think the language more than makes up for any I don't know, lack thereof, because it doesn't even matter how overused your concept is, as long as your language is interesting enough to compensate it. That's the most important thing with any poem, right? I think this is well written. There is a lot of ly sounds going on, which at some instances almost seems like a lot, but no, not really. I think this is well written, and it remains interesting despite the nature of the premise. Moving on, NHS as church. Doctor is priest with a god, a flock, a Bible. British national formulary be damned. Sometimes I just want to take the hand of whatever poor sod has crawled to the stand. Longevity, life, health, weaponized descriptive terminology makes stark the parity between functionality. The cavalcade of supportive infrastructure, which props the cathedral up, quickly becomes unstuck before the void, the final act. The human condition is lethal, the passage of time crystallized in aortic vein, muscle, brain, sapping the juice that once made you loose. It sniggers as you fall, again and again, demarcated in trends. But when does the descent end? On the floor, in the ground, in the morgue. When you begin to lack the verbal capacity to explain veracity and its flight from modernity, but I need release from this tightly bound fleece to experience frigidity, impropriety, the cacophony that nests within reality. The sermon may have stuck, the lessons fully took, but it's muddled, a promise not well handled, to prevent my leaving through the door. Once again, I really like the religious imagery going on here. Doctor is priest with a god, a flock, a Bible. I like that a lot. There was another line here, yes, from this tightly bound fleece. I like that a lot. Fleece recalls lamb, right? Or sheep, which are both common religious symbols. Also in Greek mythology, there's the golden fleece, right? That's a thing, I'm pretty sure, that could heal all wounds. I could be totally misremembering that, but I like as a Christian religious symbol, I like this phrase, I need release from this tightly bound fleece, right? Because I think a lot of people in Western culture probably, you know, were confronted with religious ideas, Christian religious ideas at a young age. And so it becomes up to us whether we release ourselves from the ideas so ingrained within us, right? Like, for example, in the United States, we say the Pledge of Allegiance, which has the phrase, one nation under God. And what of the children who don't believe in God, right? It's a weird thing to have to do in school. So, again, with the religiously charged language, the sermon may have stuck, the lessons fully took, but it's muddled, a promise not well handled, to prevent my leaving through the door. Again, there's this sense of almost indoctrination throughout this poem, and whether the speaker can escape the fleece by which they're bound, etc., and so forth. That's my reading of the poem anyway, and, it might not be the NHS might, I don't know for sure, it might not be a religious organization, but comparing it to a religious organization, I think gets the metaphor across really well, personally. And let's see, that takes us to the last poem here. A battle royale with your local pill dispenser. You come before, paper slip in hand, pursed lips, perusing my slovenly land, a quick hop and a dash yet a mile away, your simple quick health fix lies near the bay. Tap your feet and watch as my unsightly lot whip together something special to put your decaying corpse back on the pedals. Dr. McGregor has assured you it cannot fail, because otherwise, to what avail do you stand staring at this tattered disgrace? Who you want to put in place, because how many minutes can I waste? It's a pill, it's a label. A simple formulation for even those incapable, a rustling bag of delicious treats, which even grandma wouldn't eat, sits festering in a den. I turn and say, hey, would you be able to come back another day? Gasping, heeding, you turn and shout, heathen, come between me and my doctor. I don't know how many times he's had his fingers inside her. Knees buckling, begging, I riposte. You won't combust and turn into dust, but if you must, you can take your business elsewhere. Disgust, a dramatic failure of care. No matter how many strips I have at home, I require it at this very mo. My neurons are firing, blood pressure rising. Why did I choose a profession which gives nary a lesson on dealing with the battle axe, striking red hot, her painful verbiage putting me on the spot? I groan, my body moving, puppeteered by the rancor, but to get along I begin to sing a song of how many needles I could thrust into her ashen husk before the General Pharmaceutical Council deems me an undesirable. Eventually my hips give way, birthing the lifeline. The dispenser beside me is giving me the eye, judging me on the side as I kneel and provide. Have a nice day, I call on my way back to my tomb of NHS-funded buffoons. So I think the reading on this poem is pretty clear. It's about the stigmas around needing medication, right? Particularly for mental health. There's this sense of paranoia throughout the poem that the speaker, in attempting to refill their medicine, is being judged at every turn, and not only judged but mistreated by the people providing the medication, and not just the people directly providing it, but also the higher ups, right? Besides my interpretation of the poem, I will say I think there are moments when you might want to put quotations into the poem. Like here, these two stanzas sounded like a different speaker than the speaker in the rest of the poem. That was my interpretation there. I do like a lot of the rhyme in here. Some of it feels a little bit simplistic, like away and bay or hand and land. Not bad by any means, especially for a spoken word poem, you know. But for future poems, I'll say, try and challenge yourself with the rhyme scheme a little bit. I've seen that you are capable of really interesting rhymes, really unique stuff, really sonically pleasing stuff. And so I think there is more to be had. And one last note, the word yeet here, I think, just feels entirely out of place. It's kind of funny, and, you know, if it was meant to be a joke, that's totally okay. But just from a tonal standpoint, I don't think it's the right word here. But that's just my 2 cents. Overall, I liked this poetry a lot, and I think I would like it better hearing it spoken than just reading it. That said, there is still a lot to be had from reading it, and thank you so much for sending it in. Where'd that sticky note get off to? Here we go. If you want to see more from Ewan, be sure to check out Substack, Ewan Hardie 33. And with that, we'll get into our next author. So this next piece is a book, a physical book that was sent to me by Ankur Bhanderi. Let me pull back the zoom a little bit but first, if you want to see more from Ankur, you can find him on Amazon or his website, www.ankurisgreat.com. Here's the book. It's called The One About the Boy and Nothing. And if I understand correctly, the author also designed the cover, which is cool. He sent me the hardcover and the soft cover, which is also neat. Not too much of a difference there, so it's all kind of a matter of preference at this point, whether you like hard or soft cover books better. And there we have the author himself. Sorry, a little blurry. Yeah, a little out of focus. Hang on, let me see if I can do something about that. There we go. Yep, there's the man himself. So I think we'll read just the first few pages, maybe the first chapter, depending on how far we can get. Yeah, and we'll just see how it goes. So, The One About the Boy and Nothing. Let me zoom in here. I will, rather than with the poems where I read the whole poem and then gave thoughts after the fact, with this, I'm just going to be interspersing my commentary throughout. So, have you heard the one about the boy and nothing? Well, you wouldn't get it. Okay, so first note. I think it's hard to read those first 2 lines. If you've seen the movie Joker, it's hard not to think of Joker, which, is fine. I don't know. Obviously, not everyone's going to make that connection, but I think just that phrase is so attached to Joker now because of the memes around that movie. I don't know. That's just my take personally. But anyway, besides, as jokes go, there's nothing there. Heh, that's all I have. I slept until the poisonous sun went down, skipped my shift, and dreamed I went to sea and never was found. It's chilly out here and damp, and November in San Diego. The sky is a beautiful gradient of deep horizon yellows to blues, to drowned, back to sleep. I love this time of day, the dusky no-when between 2 worlds. It's fully empty, empty despite yourself, empty despite evening, traffic, white noising just a few blocks away. Empty despite an unseen beast approaching on the sidewalk up ahead. So, a note here, I really like these 2 paragraphs. I think this is a great introduction into the style of the book, where you see that language is being played with, like know when rather than know where, or using the term white noising, right? Turning a noun like white noise into a verb. I love that. I love that sort of thing, and that's just a great way to establish style right off the bat. Continuing reading. By the time I can make out the dim shape of a man, I'm already slipping into the parking lot for what appears to be a biotech company. This stupid myopia doesn't hold me back anymore. Sometimes I can act on the psychic pressure, that disturbance in the air when someone's invading my personal plot. You know what I'm talking about, right? Right? Bullshit, I'm sure, but seen or not, I slip invaders' eyes with such intuition that I can't help but fantasize. Dimly, I can make out a pale button-down shirt and ill-fitting beige dork slacks. I'm camouflaged against the city's twilight in dark grays and blues, colors to disappear in without the appearance of intent. Who wears the night better, do you think? Okay, a small note. I did say that I love the style, and I do. I think it's unique. And I think you have to be unique in this publishing market, right? But you got to be careful sometimes about being so stylistic that the audience kind of loses track of what's going on. Um, there's so much figurative language happening here that it might be a little bit hard to understand that the main character, the narrator here, is just going for a walk at night. That's all that's meant to be communicated. Sorry, not all that's meant to be communicated, but that's an important thing to communicate. And it might be easy to overlook just with the flowery language. And like I said, I really like the language personally, but anyway, that's just one thought. Obviously, not every audience member will have that same opinion, but moving on. I pull out a cigarette and let a kind of uninteresting and uninterested world weariness descend on my shoulders. Hunched against the coming night at the requisite distance from an unwindowed side door, I'm just some tired second shift man who puffs, puffs, puffs on his smoke break, and I may as well be invisible. The office drone walks by. He's playing music on his phone out loud, without headphones, for all the night to hear. Rude. He looks at me, but more in my direction than at me. I register in his mind for only a moment. I can almost feel his attention slipping away until to him I'm gone and have always been gone and have always never been to begin with. Again, I gotta praise that playing of language there. I like that a lot. And then he's gone, and then I stop being the softly beaten down technician and resume being me, or at least someone I think is me. Can you even be sure? Have you heard the one about the kid who memorized at least 4 jokes to introduce himself, but couldn't for the life or death of him remember to tell even one? Well, like most people my age, I'm 21. Funny, I like it. Jason Choi, for short. Too short, too skinny, too bent, great hair, disheveled eyes, not too blank, although dead like a soldier's, but you've heard this one before, right? You are listening. I suppose I'll have to say something worth hearing first, someday. I continue up the now empty street and turn onto Miramar. As I walk down the road, it smells alternately of a refreshing mountain spring and a potent fart. It's a frustrating olfactory journey of tension and release, if that sort of thing floats, rocks, harbors, or sinks your boat, if you have a boat to begin with. A right turn beyond the third mountain spring, and a long, shallow descent past various nearly identical corporate campuses brings me to a recessed area tucked into the back end of an office building, which one might expect to house a loading dock or dumpster, but instead has a cafe. Have you heard of such a thing? Granted, I don't know shit about what factors into the differentiation between a successful catery and an array of boarded-up windows, but they say that thing about 3 locations, and this must be at least the 4th or 5th. I appreciate it, of course. I appreciate the secrecy, the sheer underworldliness of it, but who else would? Well, I assume someone would. The restaurant must in fact still be open for business during the day-bright 9 to 5 hours when I'm liable to be found sleeping, if at all, but it's deserted right now. They have this lovely patio with tables and benches arranged beneath strings of white lights that look like tiny stars, when they're on at least. Some disappointer must have pulled the plug tonight. The small change in lighting turns the whole place into a half-remembered dreamscape. Everything is vague and vaguely peculiar. I walk to my bench anyway. The patio overlooks a sprawling parking lot lined with manicured trees with slender towering lamps and that reach me here in beams of stark blue-white light and long impenetrable shadows. My footsteps echo over the empty grid of white paint, are slow to fade, eventually give way to a heavy silence that seems to echo itself. A note there. It's kind of it seems like a run-on sentence, right? I feel it should say, my footsteps echo over the empty grid of white paint, are slow to fade, and eventually give way to a heavy silence that seems to echo itself. That's at least how I would have written it. It seems almost fragmented, as written as a list, kind of, right there. Moving on. There's a kind of holy desolation to the place, to most all abandoned places. It's beautiful and sad, and becoming a part of it makes it easier to forget how terrifying it is from the outside. I sit, I watch. The night holds me in its cold arms. What are you doing here? I freeze. The voice is light, almost bright, a little jarring as it echoes around my hollow corner of night. I kind of like the rhymes there, I have to admit. Yeah, I mean, it's fun seeing a rhyme in prose. What can I say? I like it. I can't tell where it's coming from. Without moving, I scan the patio before me for the source and see no one. The voice is a woman's, but I see no woman, or falsetto man, or anyone at all. It must be a security guard from the building behind me. This has never happened to me here before. They're not supposed to actually catch me. Maybe they've been watching me all this time and finally killed the lights to discourage me. But they would have seen that I'm not doing any... Why are you here? The voice asks again from all angles. I'm going, I say, getting up slowly to give myself time to find the guard. My voice bounces back to me in a confusing reverb, and I almost lose track of where I am. I show my empty hands and assure the phantom guard, in as unthreatening a tone as I can manage, I'll go, no problem, no harm done. I stand and turn in a smooth, apparently careless motion, and I still don't see anyone. I wish I'd brought my glasses. I wish it weren't so damn dark. I wish I were anywhere else. I wish. I shift my weight, stretch casually, cast my desperate gaze into every shadow. Once again, fragmented there, right? It should be I shift my weight, stretch, and casually cast my desperate gaze into every shadow. At least that's my opinion. Maybe it's supposed to sound incomplete, right? Oh, I'm sorry. You weren't even seeing the line I was referring to. Sorry. Let me move the book to fit the camera there. You don't have to leave. Just wondering why you're here. What a shit security guard. I turn in a slow circle, abandoning any effort to look as if I'm not looking. You look lost, I hear from 100 ghost voices whirling and mocking and jeering all around me, but there's no one here. Who are you? I ask. Sometimes I think this is a lost people kind of place, all the ghosts answer. That's not an answer. That's not an answer at all. I don't know what that means, and I'm not sure how I'm supposed to respond to it, so I say, have you heard the one about the couple lost in the night? What? This couple, a man and a woman, go for a hike and end up lost in the woods after dark. They're making their way back to the road, but their progress is slow since the night is pitch black and all they have is a dinky flashlight to shine. As they make their way along in the darkness, the woman starts to get nervous. All the wild noises around them sound to her like voices, like approaching feet, like danger and death and every lurking corner. She whispers to her boyfriend, I think someone's out there following us. You're just imagining things, he says. There's no one here but us. I'll prove it. Louder to the darkness, he shouts, is anyone out there? God, I hope not, the darkness replies. I'm fucking spooked. The night is silent for a long moment. I stay where I am, searching, waiting. Have I ever been in the woods? I mean, really in the woods, where there are no signs of human life anywhere to be seen? It sounds like a dream, you know? Finally, the voice returns, bouncing all around and back to me. What the fuck was that? I see a sudden movement to my left. Okay, I'm gonna pause there real quick. I know that the speaker just told a joke about the woods, right? But is that like a necessary detail where the speaker wonders whether they've been in the woods before? Anyway, moving on from here. A shape, now separated from the surrounding darkness by the motion of arms thrown up in the air, it rises, moves, makes itself so obvious that I'm a little ashamed to be alive and so blind. Not 15 feet away, on the far side of a table, skewered through by a large umbrella, there's standing the silhouette of a woman. Personally, I would write this as, there stands the silhouette of a woman. I think there's standing just sounds a little bit awkward, personally. Moving on. I stammer. It was just a joke. Were you talking to the dark? The shape asks, walking toward me around the tables. Did you think I was a fucking spooky night demon? She steps across the sharp blue-white line, light and dark, and I see a long young woman with a long blue-white face and long blue-white hair below her baggy hoodie. Her shorts reveal long blue-white legs. She's thin, but looks as if that were an accident. She's taller than me, and looks as if that were on purpose, out of spite. The bitch. You totally did, she says. You walked right past me and sat down, like you were all by yourself, and your stupid story spun around like a blind dog chasing its tail. Anything you can't see is just a fucking moon wizard talking to you, right? Fine, maybe I did, but this seems unnecessary. No, I say, I was just joking. Oh my God, she laughs. She won't even do me the courtesy of looking doubtful, skipping straight to cruel mockery. Rude. I just like jokes. She laughs right past my comment, bent double, and goes on for what feels to me like an unreasonably long time. I don't know what I'm supposed to do while she finishes this whole bit she's doing. I study her face as she cackles. Her mouth is too wide, her lips too thin. Her eyes are too big, although adequately dark. She might have freckles, but it's hard to tell in this light. Finally, she stops laughing and wipes at her eyes and stares at me, skeptically, perhaps, or critically, or with the impassive curiosity of a scientist. Is there crap on my face? Is my mouth the wrong size, or my eyes? It's the eyes, isn't it? She says matter-of-factly, you don't know how to talk to people. I'll keep reading. We'll read just a little bit further, and then we'll do some concluding thoughts here. Because I don't insult people I don't even know. Yes, exactly. You should find someone to teach you before it's too late. What does that even mean? We watch each other for a time. Emma, she says. Jace, I hold out my hand. She doesn't take it. Jace? Yeah. What kind of name is Jace? Nickname, I explain. Why can't anyone ever just accept it? For Jason. She doesn't respond. Beyond a thoughtful grunt, I ask, what are you doing here? Ladies first. What? I asked first, stupid. I don't know, I come here sometimes. I've never seen you here before. You barely saw me here tonight, she smirks to herself a little. One of her eyebrows goes up for a second. I go places, big deal. But why here? What? Why here? It's nice here, why shouldn't I? You don't own it, why do you come here? Fine. Yeah, okay, there's a section break coming up, so we'll keep going for a minute. I own it. She looks me up and down. Yeah, I bet. Fine, it's nice, I admit. I don't know how to ask her to stay, to sit and to talk and to just be present, but not in the pathetically needy way that you know I mean it. I start to speak, but she interrupts me. Listen, Jason, I've got to run. I'll see you around maybe, yeah? Jace. Will you? Sure, she says. I don't believe her. Jason, she says. I don't like her. Emma throws a hand up to her brow in an ironic salute as she turns to leave. She strides across the near corner of the blue-white parking lot on log, blue-white legs. I think about creeping after her, but she power walks through a gap between two trees and is gone before my slow brain can decide what to do. I wonder what kind of house we'd live in if we were to get married. That's weird. Don't do that. I hope I see her again. I know I'm being weird, but I would have decided to not stalk her given the time to actually decide. For the record, if you're keeping notes. Okay, yep, we'll pause there. There's a section break. So, as I said, some concluding thoughts here. The style is fun. It's playful. It's obviously, playing with language, which is appreciated. Language can get boring sometimes, especially for people who like to read a lot, and so it's good to keep it interesting. This interaction, I think, if I might be so bold, I almost think this should have been the beginning of the book. It's almost overused writing advice, but you start your story in the middle of action, right? In the middle of a conversation is an easy way to hook your audience, because we like to converse. We like to listen to what people have to say. We're empathetic like that, and all reading is an act of empathy anyway. And so I think if the book had started with Jace being caught, where was that line? Yeah, just right here, where Emma says, "What are you doing here?" I freeze. And then, some background, some context. I was in the middle of a dark building where I shouldn't have been. I was trespassing. Not in those words, obviously, use your distinct style. But that's just my take. Starting the story in the middle, it's just an easy way to hook the audience. Speaking of the style, I do really like it a lot, but this dialogue, these interactions, it does seem a little bit scripted, right? Like when you're watching a movie and you think to yourself, this isn't the way normal people converse, right? It's a little theatrical. And I think that's part of the point. I think Emma is meant to be a theatrical character. Also, this interaction is funny to me. Maybe the author is not from the United States, but as somebody who lives in North America, Jace is not an uncommon name. I've met multiple people with the name Jace, and so for Emma to be so confused, it strikes me as a little bit unintentionally funny. But I don't know, maybe Emma's not supposed to be naive because Jace says, why can't anyone ever just accept it? So it's clear he's had this dilemma before. So, like I said, maybe that's just a non-United States thing. And that's really nitpicky on my part. Anyway, those are my concluding thoughts here. I will say, if we were to look at the back of the book and read the little synopsis here, there's a quote from what we just read. And then here it says, one night he meets Emma, who calls him an idiot and introduces him to a hidden world. Jace is sure that whatever it is that he's lacking must be in there somewhere. As he dives deeper into this new world, he loses track of his place in it and must face the bitter truth that he can only be where he takes himself. So that's a really interesting description. And for me, the most important thing on a book is a blurb about the book, right? I don't want to see reviews from people who have read the book. I don't want to see awards that the book has won. I want to know what the book is about. And this is a great description. That being said, this description is so great that I need a piece of it at the beginning of the book, right? I need to know that it is what it sounds like, that this blurb is not misleading me, right? Because I have read books where the blurb on the back of the book doesn't really match the content of the book. The one that I think of is The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. The blurb on the back of that book made it sound like a mystery, when actually it was really more a coming-of-age story, and the mystery was like the tiniest actual element of the book. There was nothing to really be solved in the end. And it was still a really great book, but I couldn't help but feel misled. So anyway, those are my thoughts there. If you do want to buy this book, or if you want to look at any of Ankur's other stuff, once again, he is on Amazon as Ankur Bhanderi, and his website, www.ankurisgreat.com. I really want to thank him for sending me this. I love just physical books, and so receiving this one for free, super, super kind. Thank you, Ankur. Really, really awesome. With that, we're going to move back into some poetry, and then after this poetry, we're going to do a short story. So this poet is on Instagram and TikTok as lauryn.hartnett, and I've realized I have not been referring to my notes here. I'm sorry about that. I meant to issue a content warning about some of the language in the previous book we read. As for content warnings here, these poems do focus on mental health, so I don't think I did a content warning for the first batch of poems either. Sorry about that. I hope that wasn't an issue for anyone, but yeah, so these poems do focus on mental health, so be advised about that. The author's full name, how she wanted to be credited, was Lauryn Farragher, or Farragher. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it there. But yeah, if you want to read more of her stuff, Instagram and TikTok at lauryn.hartnett. So I think we have 3 poems here from Lauryn, and they're a little bit shorter. Let's see what there is to be had here. So this first poem is titled Elephant's Foot. And if it's all in my head, why do I feel it in my bones? In the way that I walk, one weighted footstep placed behind another, only slightly. Plain dark streets, computer screens, and bees. My brain leaks a substance, and it flows through my veins into my stomach where it nests and eats away the lining. I could ignite my throat, or just let it grow, until it pours from the pit and sculpts its own summit, nuclear, red, glowing with enmity. So, I like that the poem starts with the word and. That's pretty unique. And it's kind of like what we were talking about with the book, just barely, where it almost starts in the middle of action, right? And here it's a rhetorical question, which, like I said, can be often on the nose. And I think it is a little bit on the nose, right? And if it's all in my head, why do I feel it in my bones? But really, it's only on the nose if you already have the context that these poems are about mental health, which I think was clear in the collection that was sent. But yeah, it's a fair question. And it's the project of the poem here, and it ties back to the title, where why is it that mental health affects us physically, right? If it's quote unquote mental health. And so if it is all in our heads, why do we feel it in our bones? And it continues, in the way that I walk, one weighted footstep placed behind another, only slightly. And so this, to me, is where the title comes into play, right? And I think it's a great metaphor, elephant's foot. We get so bogged down, those of us who have experienced depression before, right? We get so depressed that literally our body feels heavy, our footsteps feel heavy, right? Because there's this sense of like, why am I going on? That's kind of the call of depression, right? Like, what's the point of this? Why do I keep going? And so our bodies feel so heavy that we don't want to get out of bed. We don't want to take one step after another. Or even when we do, they feel weighted. They're weighted steps, right? So those are really interesting lines when grouped all together and when taken back with the title. Moving on, plain dark streets, computer screens, and bees. I think that's interesting. And bees, how exactly do bees come into this, right? That really gives a reader something to think about. My brain leaks a substance, and it flows through my veins into my stomach where it nests. Some pretty good visual storytelling there, and symbolism as well. I think, I don't know, I think it kind of loses track of itself a little bit, where it says, my brain leaks a substance and it flows through my veins. With that first visual, when you say your brain is leaking, I think it's easy to view it as leaking out of your ears. At least that's the way I read it. And so when you contradict that, not contradict's the wrong word, when you clarify by writing and it flows through my veins, it kind of throws off the visual for me just a tiny bit. But that's just me personally. Maybe that's that's only my problem in reading it. I like the idea of the substance nesting. That's pretty good. And eating away at the lining. I think maybe you could even expand on that. What is this substance exactly? How is it alive? What is it like? Yeah, I will say the first half, even the first third of the poem is the most interesting to me. This, I won't say it loses me because it doesn't. There is still a lot to be had here with the language. I think Ignite My Throat is pretty good. This idea that, like, you know, you're going to set your inner body on fire just to get the parasite out. Or you could just let the parasite grow, this substance, until it pours from the pit and sculpts its own summit. Nice rhyme there, by the way. Nuclear red, glowing with enmity. So there's this idea that depression, too, it makes us angry. It makes us hateful, right? At least that's my interpretation. So interesting language for sure. I think it just becomes maybe a little too unspecific. I wish there were a little bit more about this creature, this thing growing in the stomach. That's my 2 cents. The next poem, you call this a daily routine. My soul was spun from sadness, and I've spent this life attempting ignorance. Mum lost her sister, now a part of her is gone, and I miss it. And how I love you, and how this love makes me fear certain frequencies when your sound tenses and I am a child again, And it's these little comments with which you weave this quilt of guilt. And although it itches and makes me bleed, I crave it like a newborn starved of milk. It's warm, and I know its patterns. And I have pushed my body beyond its capabilities in an effort to impress, and now my skin and fat has left me. What do you see in my red shoelace features? I hope you see a god, for I have torn ligaments, crushed cartilage. And so with every push-up and painting, alone strum on iron strings, I apologize. So a lot of really good stuff going on here, I must say. This poem, much like one we previous read, seems to be about the relationship between a mother and a child. I will say, the first line, my soul was spun from sadness. It's good alliteration, but sadness is such a general word, right? It's overused. We say sadness, we say sad to describe the way we're feeling too often, and in that sense it kind of has lost meaning, right? I think there is a more specific word that could be used rather than sadness. That said, things do get better from there. This is sort of just, a description of happenings. The speaker's mom lost their sister. I will say a part of her is gone. That sounds a tiny bit cliche. There's a more unique way to phrase that, I'm sure. But that said, this love makes me fear certain frequencies. So again, we get a view into a relationship that's complicated, right? This mother has lost a part of her, as it said previously, and it seems like they take it out on the speaker, right? And yet, it's a mother and a child, right? They can't help but love each other, probably a mother and daughter. To me, the most interesting stanza is definitely this third stanza right here. For one thing, quilt of guilt, I think that's just a really good internal rhyme. I like that a lot. But I love the symbol of a quilt for what's being described here. You weave this quilt. It itches and makes me bleed. I crave it like a newborn starved of milk. It's warm, and I know its patterns. And what a great metaphor for an abusive relationship, right? Because there is a love behind that relationship. It's complicated, right? People don't get into relationships generally unwillingly. Obviously, that's not true all the time. Don't let me overgeneralize there. But like with a mother and daughter, there is going to be a sense of love there, just kind of inherently, right? Not 100% of the time. Again, sorry if I'm overgeneralizing here, but having an abusive parent is like using a quilt that itches and makes you bleed. Even though it does those things to you, it's warm and it's familiar, right? Anyway, sorry if I was generalizing too much there. All I mean to say is that this is a great symbol for abuse, and it's just very well said, very well painted with these words. And then we have more here. I have pushed my body beyond its capabilities in an effort to impress. I think we've all been in such a situation with someone whose affection we crave, where we do too much to try to get their attention. Speaking of, I hope you see a god, for I have torn ligaments, crushed cartilage. And this is the speaker referring to themselves. What do you see in my red shoelace features? I hope you see a god. Good descriptor there, by the way. Red shoelace features, that's unique. I hope you see a god, for I have torn ligaments, crushed cartilage. That, to me, sounds like a reference to Jesus Christ himself, injured and died for the sins of the world. And I think that's a great comparison with an abusive relationship, because the speaker is taking on the pains of the sins of the mother, right? They are atoning, essentially, for all of the violence and sin that this mother is enacting. And it's not fair. Just like one might say it wasn't fair for Christ to be perfect and innocent and to do what he did, right? Just like a child is innocent and they don't deserve to have their ligaments torn or their cartilage crushed. So that, I think, is the reference being made with the word God. But even if not, I think that's just great language. And in the end, the speaker is the one who's apologizing, right? Even though, again, they've done nothing wrong, they're innocent. And so it's visceral, right? Without needing to actually describe the violence that's happening in this relationship. So really good stuff there. This last one, this third one, is called Waves and When to Crash. I fingered small tulips and watched the sunrise and stared into the drain in my weak square shower, listening to a song far too sad for someone moving on. And I am so afraid of slipping, of chipping the porcelain, falling back into the hole I fought so hard to climb from, yet I don't think I ever left that cliffside. I merely turned from it and pondered on the stretch of land rather than the plummet. I couldn't bear to lose sight of its sharp edges and supple song, to abandon that din that deafened my heart, its safe, warm embrace that whispered to me a promise of a big, soft bed and a mouth of rotten teeth. So, a lot going on here. This line right here, far too sad, it has the same problem that I emphasized earlier. It's just not a very unique descriptor. I think you could replace that with something else. That said, I like the rhyme of song and on. It's a little simple, but I think it does the trick. Listening to a song far too sad for someone moving on, it just sounds pleasant, right? This idea of the speaker in the shower and they're afraid of slipping, of chipping the porcelain, I think that has more than one meaning, of course, but I kind of like visualizing it as them still in the shower and they're worried that they're going to chip the interior of the shower rather than being worried about their own well-being. I think that speaks to the mental state of the speaker, but obviously I think porcelain is representing more than just that. The symbol of a hole that needs to be climbed from is a little bit overdone, perhaps, especially when it comes to addiction, which I don't think this poem is explicitly about addiction. I think it could apply to addicts, but perhaps there's a different way to word this, or perhaps a different symbol entirely. I like the cliffside for a lot of reasons. I think that's a pretty charged symbol, especially for those dealing with mental health issues. You know, it brings to mind images of somebody on the ledge, as it were, right? And I assume the sight being talked about in the third stanza is the view from the cliffside, I assume. And I like the descriptor of supple song. I think the sharp edges, again, refers to the cliff, which is pretty good. The ending of this poem is perhaps the most intriguing part. It's like, you know, if the speaker moves away from the cliffside, do they want to return to a big soft bed and a mouth of rotten teeth? I think that's an interesting symbol, the rotten teeth. Really, really fascinating there. I don't know if I have more to say beyond that. These are good. I think they're just some minor changes that need to take place. As with the first batch of poems that we looked at, there's a lot of good going on here with just a couple, you know, wording or symbolic changes that might need to happen here. So good batch, really good. Once again, this is lauryn.hartnett on Instagram and TikTok. I think these poems are relatable, much like the first batch that we looked at as well. They'll probably speak to a very young audience, all of the poems that we've looked at here. So last up, we're going to take a look at a short story. The short story was called Mr. Wink, is called rather. It's Mr. Wink. The author goes by The Quiet One on Creepypasta. They have a few stories up there. If you want to read this story in its entirety, it's at www.creepypasta.com/Mr. Wink. Mr. -Wink. You get it. Yeah, we're gonna read through maybe half of this story. I don't want to spoil it here, because if you do want to read the whole story, I do want to send some people to the way of this author here, the quiet one. But yeah, we'll read what we can here. So give me just a second. We'll zoom the camera out, and we will begin. Annie wasn't enjoying dinner, her eyes instead staring down at her light-up shoes, which had been a gift from her grandmother, beneath the table. Sorry, I was just debating in my mind whether I want to do commentary right away or save it for later. I don't know. You guys let me know what works and what doesn't work in this. This is all kind of experimental, being the first time we're doing this here. Just a note: grandmother doesn't have to be capitalized here. If you were using grandmother in place of a name, then you would capitalize the word. But since you're using it as a title, her grandmother, it doesn't need to be capitalized. So just a grammatical note there. If you were to write this sentence as, which had been a gift from grandma, then you would capitalize grandma. Anyway, it wasn't because she disliked the meal her mother had prepared. She loved hot dogs and refried beans, especially the bacon flavor in the beans. She just wasn't interested in looking up that night. Her mother and father were shouting again. Annie, being just shy of 6 years old, didn't understand a lick of what it was they were shouting about, but it made her stomach churn. I will say Annie, that's a great name for a child character. I think it just communicates youth and innocence in the way that it sounds. Anyway, moving on. Dialogue. All I'm saying is that's all you ever do. Say. You never actually get out and do. Hey, I'm the breadwinner of the family here. It's because of me that there's food on the table tonight. Paul. What? What, Eileen? Your line of work. Oh, what? I'm not good enough, Eileen? Not good enough for you? My line of work gets us what we need, doesn't it? I just wish that you could try a little harder, said her mother. Again, mother doesn't need to be capitalized. Said her mother, tears in her voice. What kind of a future are we giving our daughter if all you ever make yourself out to be is a... Shut up. Just shut up, you hag. I'm the one who feeds you. Sorry, hang on. You want to argue with me? I'll just keep all the money for myself, not giving you a dime of it. No, not a dime. Her mother bit her lip, turning to the side to face away from Annie. Paul, can we continue this later, after she's in bed? There's nothing to continue. The fact is I have a job, you don't. You do what I say, or you don't get any of the cards in this relationship. Annie looked up for a moment to see her mother's eyes filled with water, her head hanging. The pit in her stomach continued to swirl, making her want to bring food up and out of her throat, rather than put it in. She quickly looked back down at her light-up shoes, hoping in vain that watching the pink and blue lights on the soles would bring a smile to her face. So a couple things I want to note quickly. So like we were talking about with the book that we just read, this is a good example of starting a story in the middle of action, right? There's an argument going on here. It doesn't take long for us to get into the argument, and so it's a good way to hook the audience. Another note, it is beyond easy to sympathize with Annie here, reading this dialogue, and then this little note that she hoped she might smile by looking at her light-up shoes. Like, how sympathetic, right? At least in my opinion. Annie, came the soothing voice of her mommy. She didn't look up. Leave the poor kid alone, Eileen. Aren't you tired of bossing her around? She could almost hear her mother holding her breath. Annie, would you please eat some dinner? She shook her head. Why not, sweetie? Leave the darn kid alone, Eileen. Annie may have considered giving a response, but her father's snarl abated that. Honey, you need to eat something. If you don't want your hot dog, how about I get you some mac and cheese? Would that taste good? You're not making her another meal, Eileen. She either eats this or she goes to bed. Annie stood up from the table, not bothering to look at the brilliance of her feet as she marched off. She went right up to the base of the stairs and began heading up in a heavy-footed manner to let her parents know she was not pleased. The pinks and blues of the shoes filled the top of the stairwell as she got to the end, going straight to her room without bothering to turn on the light. She didn't take off her shoes, her socks. She didn't even change into her favorite kitten pajamas. She simply climbed up into the small bed in the corner of what best resembled a large closet and put her head on the pillow. Sorry, we're already partway into the story right now, but I do want to read some notes here. Yeah, just, sorry, a content warning. As you can see, this story contains references to an abusive household, children in distress, and overdosing, which we'll play in later. And so if any of those topics are too much for you, you might want to tap this one out, or rather tap out on this one. Anyway, continuing the story. In fact, sorry, let me take a look at the... Okay, looks like that's as good as it's gonna get. Anyway. Muffled shouts and groans carried up the stairwell, Annie paying mind to none of them as she shut her eyes tight to try and fall asleep. Go to bed, go to bed, go to bed. If her mother came up to say goodnight that night, Annie didn't hear it. She was out within the hour after letting her tears drain her of energy. The room was still dark, but Annie could see. She saw everything. The small dresser, the door creaked open just a tad, the edge of her blankets, which created a barrier of protection around her. Even though she knew it was night, she couldn't find it in herself to feel tired. She was just wired. So this almost seems like a contradiction, right? It sounded like she fell asleep here, but now it sounds like she's awake and not tired anymore. So did she wake up in the middle of the night? And if so, could that be made more clear? But moving on from there. In a strange move, she got out of bed and looked out her second-story window to the backyard. She gasped as her mind registered that their fence was gone. In its place, a wide-open field. Her heart sped up as a massive smile grew on her face, seeing a herd of unicorns grazing in the bright green pasture. Excitedly, she ran downstairs and out into the backyard, not even noticing that it was now as bright as noonday out there. Unicorns, she exclaimed, running towards the majestic creatures. They looked up at her, almost smiling as they began to run away in a playful frolic. Annie laughed, spinning in circles as she followed. Wait for me, wait for me. The creatures were now in a full-on sprint, practically gliding through the air as their powerful legs allowed them to leap for seemingly miles at a time. Annie began to feel herself doing likewise, making massive bounds as she got closer and closer to the horses. She was suddenly stopped, jerked out of the air in an instant. Her feet went gently back towards the ground, the large hand around her chest being cautious as it lowered her. Be careful there, little one, came a strange voice. There's a cliff right there. Last time I checked, only unicorns can fly. Annie looked up, her eyes filled with wonder as she saw what was standing before her. A dark figure towered above, leaning over her like a muscular tent. He wasn't dark in the sense of his skin or hair or anything. He just seemed encased in a shadow. He had a bald head, two piercing black eyes, which somehow gave off a glow. He had no nose, but his mouth, oh, there certainly was a mouth all right. It was full of crooked teeth, yellow to a certain degree. But it didn't make the man look unattractive to any degree. Using the word degree twice there is a little bit redundant, but I digress. The rotten teeth almost seemed charming. The black and red vest which he wore, Annie soon realized, was more of a bodysuit, as no more of his skin below the collar was shown anywhere. His hands, though, his hands were huge, massive, talon-like paws, which could easily wrap around Annie's entire body, as they just had when he grabbed her. Okay, a quick pause there. So there are a lot of creepypastas, of course, and they all, well, not all, but a lot of them have creatures, right, or monsters, or these nefarious figures. And because there's just such a wide breadth of horror antagonists, it's just hard to create one that's wholly original anymore, right? And so I see almost the difficulty here in trying to describe this figure in a unique way, where it seems a little bit like it's going back and forth on the description, where He has these crooked yellow teeth, but they don't look unattractive. They look charming. Or he has two piercing black eyes that gave off a glow, and he had no nose, but he doesn't look very threatening, right? It's hard to get a grasp for what this character actually is like, and if their look is supposed to be unsettling or not, because it reads as unsettling, but the author, the narrator, seems to want to convince us that he's not actually. So it's I don't know. There's this inner turmoil, kind of. It sounds like, with the narrator's voice. Moving on. Who are you? Annie stuttered, a sense of unease washing over her. Why, me? I'm Mr. Wink. Annie raised an eyebrow. Mr. Wink? Yes, they call me that because I wink at people who I like, he said, winking at Annie. She blushed. You like me? Why, of course I like you. You seem like a fun little girl. But I'm not fun. I just cost money. He frowned. No, not at all, my darling. How could someone so beautiful like you be unfun? She chuckled. You're nice. Well, he huffed playfully. I try to be. Being nice to people is what keeps the earth turning, you know. It is. It sure is. Without niceness, nothing could ever happen. Sorry, hang on. Nope, I had to sneeze there, but it looks like it's not coming. Anyway, sorry about that. Okay, it sure is. Without niceness, nothing could ever happen. Annie frowned. Nothing ever happens at my house. Nonsense. I'm sure you have a lovely home. No, Mommy and Daddy scream a lot. Screaming isn't nice. No, you're right, it isn't. But I'm sure your Mommy and Daddy are nice in other ways. Annie was too focused on looking down at the grass to notice the smile which crept across Mr. Wink's face. I don't know, maybe. Well, here, little Miss Annie, everything is nice all the time. She looked up to gawk at him. You knew my name. But of course, I can read minds, you know. Really? Really. Okay, she squinted, trying to think. What am I thinking of now? Mr. Wink made a face as he extended his hand out towards her head, mushing his features together as he stuck out his tongue, as if in deep thought. You're thinking of your kitty cat pajamas. She laughed. No, I'm thinking of the number 7. You silly goose. You can't read minds. Mr. Wink laughed. Maybe not, but I'm practicing. Annie continued to chuckle, smiling up at this strange new friend she seemed to have made. Are you hungry, Annie? She nodded. Mr. Wink turned around, bringing out a bowl of ice cream. Annie gasped, a wave of excitement coming over her. Ice cream? Ice cream. Yay! Oh, thank you, Mr. Wink. This is exciting. I couldn't be any happier to give it to you. She took a large spoonful, licking her lips as she ate. Thanks. You're very much welcome. She downed the ice cream, smiling as she did so. She found herself staring off into the distance at the vast fields around her and Mr. Wink, unsure what exactly to do next. I think school is coming again soon. Yes, you'd best be off to school, Mr. Wink said. Annie stood up, waving him goodbye as she began running back to her house. Things started becoming fuzzy. She started shaking even. Shaking, fuzziness. Annie. She opened her eyes to look at her mom with a dazed expression. Annie, it's time to get ready for school. Okay, she grumbled, turning to climb out of bed. I'll have breakfast ready for you in 10 minutes. I love you. She departed the room, leaving Annie in there by herself. She looked out the window, frowning when she saw the fence outside. Dream, she sighed. Small note. Departed sounds a little too formal. I think saying she left the room would be less distracting, but that's probably, such a nitpick, so anyway. She climbed off the bus, the afternoon sun beating down on her as she crossed the street to her house. She hadn't been feeling well that day. Her heart just seemed to be in a perpetual state of sinking all throughout Mrs. Carson's lessons. She moseyed up to the front door, the yellow patches of grass in their yard of weeds, white noise by this point. She put her hand to the doorknob, staring at the oh-so-familiar patches of chipped paint as she twisted the handle and went through. The subtle sounds of rock and roll became more aggressive as she stepped inside, the smell of beer filling her nostrils. "Hey, Annie," her father shouted as she walked in. She glared at him. "Yeah." "Turn out the lights when you go upstairs, will ya?" She nodded slowly as her father's concourse of sickly-looking friends stared at her, half with a wild smile and half with a menacing frown. Good girl, Annie." She made her way over to the stairwell, shutting off the lights. "Heck yeah, Paul, this is way better in the dark." Sorry, I just laugh a little bit because I think hell is the better word. I just can't imagine why the person speaking here wouldn't say hell. Anyway, just again, maybe that's nitpicking, but anyway. Annie ran up the stairs as quickly as she could, immediately turning left to go to her room. She went in and put her backpack down, any thought of doing the assigned spelling homework far from her mind. She instead sat on her bed, wondering where her mother was. She never went to these sorts of things. She was probably out shopping, making that her excuse as to why she couldn't be her husband's babe. Shouts and hoots reverberated up the stairwell, and Annie climbed in bed and put the pillow over her ears to dilute their potency. Before long, she found herself getting sleepier and sleepier. A sudden noise jolted her from her slumber. She looked up to see a hole in her window. Some sort of ball had been thrown in. "Throw it back," came a familiar voice. Annie went up to the window, looking out skeptically. She gasped, "Mr. Wink?" "Annie, come out and play ball with me." She turned and looked at the pink baseball, which almost seemed to be smiling. Excitedly, she rushed over to grab the thing and began running down the stairs. The house was suddenly empty, an eerie sense of silence over the living room, which had been chaotic just a few minutes ago. Annie paid no mind to it, though. She was just happy that her new friend was back. She rounded the corner, ball in hand, and went right up to Mr. Wink and gave him a bigger hug than she'd ever given either of her parents. "Mr. Wink, I thought you were a dream." He reciprocated the embrace, squeezing her tight. "Well then, you would have thought right." She stepped back. "What? I am a dream." She looked around herself. "You mean I'm dreaming?" "Yep, you're really back in your bed right now with the pillow over your head." She turned around, the flowers in the sky suddenly making sense. "So I'm not really awake. If you were really awake, would the grass be frosting?" She suddenly became aware that her feet were bare, enveloped in some sort of soft and squishy texture. "Whoa!" She bent down and put a glob on her finger, sticking it into her mouth. "This is awesome." Mr. Wink smiled, his crooked yellow teeth giving off an odd feeling Annie couldn't quite put her finger on. "So, little Miss Annie, what should we do first?" She beamed at him, her senses full of wonder. "Can we fly? You mean like in a plane?" He sidestepped, revealing a small crop duster behind him. "Whoa, you can fly a plane? I think that you can fly a plane too, can't you?" She was suddenly wearing white gloves and a small suit resembling the suits of the flight attendants she'd seen on television. "Maybe I can." "Good. Larry, fuel us up." Annie looked around Mr. Wink to see a small boy carrying a hose to the plane. Annie stared at the boy, waiting for him to turn around. He looked her age, same height, a familiar children's hairdo, a body proportions that would suggest he was indeed a kindergartner. He never did, though, simply fueling up the plane hurriedly and running off once he got it done. "Come on, Annie," Mr. Wink exclaimed, grabbing her hand. Her thoughts turned away from the boy, and she sprinted to keep up with the lanky legs of Mr. Wink. "Can I drive it?" "Sure can." He helped her up into the cockpit, climbing in the seat right behind her. He tucked his knees up into his chest comically, again making faces which caused Annie to laugh. "You're so funny, Mr. Wink." "My mama raised me to please." She started the engine, somehow knowing how it worked, a huge grin on her face. She took off and soared into the sky. Annie stared out the window of the bus, hands on the foggy glass pane as she squinted to try to get one last glimpse of the neighborhood before they turned the corner. Every day they passed through that neighborhood with green lawns and fresh sidewalks. She thought it was so pretty. She tried to soak up every last moment of it she could. Alas, though, it was always fleeting. Before long, she had to look at the boring old familiarity of her neighborhood, dreading coming home to her belligerent father and powerless mother. Alas, the bus did indeed stop, and she got out of her seat to walk towards the front, through the swarths of straight-faced kids. She got down and crossed the street, her shoes lighting up the cracks in the road and sidewalk, with blue and pink flashes. She got to her front door and went in, not bothering to dust off her shoes before coming into the house. "Hi, Annie, how was school today?" Annie didn't respond at first, looking around hesitantly. Her father didn't seem to be there. Maybe she could talk. "Okay." "Yeah, what did you do?" "We talked about spelling today." "Oh, what's the longest word you can spell?" She got a grin. I would just write that as she grinned. I think that's a little awkwardly phrased, but again, maybe nitpicking. "There. There. There." Sorry, another slight nitpick. I think you would want to write this as T-H-E, etc. Hyphens rather than commas. But, I mean, obviously the dialogue still comes across. "Good job," her mother cried. "Oh, honey, I'm so proud of you." She went in for a hug, a sense of warmth coming upon her. "I love you, Mommy. I love you too, Annie." "Well, don't tell your father, but I got you something special at the store yesterday. I wanted to give it to you last night, but you were asleep." Her eyes widened. "What is it?" She pulled out a small chocolate bar from behind her back, flashing the shiny label. Annie's eyes got wider, and her grin became uncontrollable. "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, Mommy." "You're welcome, sweetheart." A slam of the door, and their hearts simultaneously froze. Around the corner marched Paul. "What are you saying thank you for?" Annie hung her head, hiding the bar behind her back. "Oh, nothing, dear. What are you doing home so early?" "I got laid off." "Laid off or fired?" "Shut it, Eileen." "What's Annie so excited about?" "Nothing, Paul. She was just happy to be home." "Uh-huh, 'cause kids always say thank you when they're just excited about being home." He bent down to stare Annie in the eyes. "What was it, kid?" "Nothing, Paul." "Shut up." He jumped back to his full height, putting his hand on Eileen's face and pushing her backward. She stumbled into the wall, falling to the ground. "What was it, kid?" Okay, yeah, we'll stop there. That's about the halfway point of the story. Concluding thoughts here. I think it's very well written, honestly. I think writing children is a hard task, unironically, because, we as writers, the more we write, the more adult our writing becomes, to put it that way. The more mature, I guess, is the word I'm looking for. Our writing, it becomes rounded out, our vocabularies develop, and so suddenly when we have to put ourselves into the mind of a child, that can be a tall order, right? Which is tough. But here, I think it really is good. This is an authentic kindergartner, if you ask me, for the most part. Is this scary? I don't know if scary is exactly the word I would use. It is a horror story, and it does become more unsettling as it goes on. The first half, it's a slow burn. Dread is the word that I would use to describe my feelings while reading this story. I wasn't scared, but I felt a lot of dread, and I felt really, really worried for Annie. And so in that sense, it is kind of effective horror, right? Because you feel a sense of fear for the main character, fear in the sense of you worry about what's going to happen to them. And pretty bold. I did read the rest of the story on my own time, and it's a bold ending, to put it that way. In fact, I don't know that Annie deserves what happens to her. Then again, sometimes horror is supposed to have unhappy endings, and that's just part of the genre, and that's okay. So this story, it won't be everyone's cup of tea purely because of subject matter, I think. That said, I do think it is well written, and I'll say that to wrap up my thoughts there. So thank you for your submissions. I'm going to try to make this a weekly thing, but bear with me with my schedule and everything. Oh, and one last reminder on that author. They go by The Quiet One, and their work is available on Creepypasta. That story specifically is creepypasta.com/Mr-Wink. So, thank you again, really. I love reading. I love writing, Dadoy. And so reading your work was super gratifying, all of you who have submitted so far. And if you didn't see your work here, don't worry. I'm just taking the submissions as they come. So just keep your eyes peeled. And hopefully we can just keep the ball rolling. And hope you enjoyed. Please leave any feedback you've got in the comments. I would really love to hear it. Thank you, guys.